The room is already laughing when it happens. Not the warm kind, not the kind that rises naturally from a good line or a familiar face. This laughter lands unevenly. A few voices come in late, others stop too soon. It moves across the room like something rehearsed. Dean Martin is on stage when the moment turns. He has done this 1,000 times. He knows the weight of a room. He knows when it is with him and when it is waiting. This time it is neither. The attention is sharp, focused, directed. Something is said, something small, not enough to stop the night, enough to change it. Those who were there later said it was meant to sound harmless. A joke, a tease, the kind that keeps the show moving, but the room understands what it is really for. It lands on Dean in front of everyone. Not shouted, not dramatic, just placed there and left to sit. He does not react right away. The band keeps playing. The lights do not change. Drinks are lifted, but something slips out of rhythm. A few people stop smiling. Others look down. Some lean forward, curious to see what he will do. Dean hears it clearly. He does not miss meaning. He never did. This is not about humor. It is about position. The silence after the line is longer than expected, not because Dean hesitates, but because he does not respond the way the room expects. He does not cover it with charm. He does not smooth it out. He stands there, calm still. For a moment, no one knows whether to clap or laugh. The insult has already done its work. It was never meant to be loud. It was meant to be visible. Those who understood power in that room felt it shift, not in Dean's favor, not yet. The night does not stop, but it has changed direction. And whatever happens next will not be undone. To understand why that moment mattered, it helps to understand where it happened. Las Vegas at that time was not just a place to perform. It was a system, a closed one, bright on the surface, rigid underneath. Every stage belonged to someone. Every spotlight came with permission. Performers were not just entertainers. They were assets, useful as long as they stayed agreeable, replaceable the moment they caused friction. Most learned this early. You could be famous and still be small. You could fill a room and still answer to people who never showed their faces. Public humiliation was one of the tools. Not crude, not violent, quiet, clean, effective. It reminded everyone watching where the lines were. Laugh along, move on, protect the night. Dean Martin knew these rules. He had lived inside them for years. He knew when to lean into a joke. He knew when to let something pass. His ease on stage was not carelessness. It was control earned through repetition. But control in Vegas was always conditional. Even someone like Dean was allowed his image only as long as it served the room. The moment he became inconvenient, the room reminded him. Most nights the reminder was subtle. This one was not. The people in charge did not raise their voices. They did not need to. Their presence alone carried weight. They sat where power usually sat. They were not there to enjoy the show. They were there to measure it. And to measure him. Everyone else understood what that meant. You did not interrupt the flow. You did not defend yourself publicly. You absorbed it and kept going. That was how careers survived. Dean had survived that way before. But this night placed something else in the middle of the room. Someone smaller, someone exposed. According to accounts, the comment did not only land on Dean. It brushed against someone near him, someone without insulation, without a reputation to fall back on. A person who could not afford attention. The laughter that followed reached them too. Dean saw it. Others noticed it later when they thought back on the night, how his posture changed slightly, how his eyes moved away from the crowd and then returned. He was not angry, he was alert. The rules were clear. He could take the hit himself. That was expected, but allowing someone else to be reduced alongside him was different. That kind of silence stayed with a man. The room, however, kept moving. It always did. People sipped drinks. The band waited for a cue. The expectation was simple. Dean would answer with humor. The night would continue. The balance would remain intact. That was the safe ending. But safety was not what settled over the stage. Dean's calm did not break. It hardened. He did not rush. He did not smile it away. He let the space stretch just long enough for people to feel it. Those who later described the moment said it felt longer than it was. A pause heavy enough to be noticed, but not dramatic enough to draw applause. That was when some people began to understand that something had gone wrong. Not for Dean. For the room. Vegas thrived on the idea that nothing lingered, that everything reset with the next song. But this moment stayed visible. It did not dissolve. Dean stood there knowing exactly what was being asked of him. Play along. Accept the correction. Prove that the room still owned the night. He also knew what it would cost to refuse. Refusal in Vegas did not arrive loudly. It arrived later, in smaller rooms, in phone calls that never came back, in offers that dried up without explanation. The punishment was rarely immediate. That made it worse. Dean had lived long enough to recognize that shape of consequence. The man on stage was not confused. He was weighing something. Those close to him would later say that he had reached a point in his life where certain trades no longer felt clean, where winning the room meant losing something quieter. Standing there, he saw the vulnerable figure again, saw how quickly the room had turned, how easily laughter had been directed. This was how it worked. Everyone knew it, but seeing it happen in front of him made it sharper. He understood that the moment was no longer about embarrassment. It was about agreement. Agree to the terms, and the night would move on. Disagree, and the night would remember him. The audience waited. Not impatiently, carefully. The power in the room was not nervous yet. It assumed compliance. It always had. Dean took one breath. He did not speak. He did not leave. He simply did not give the expected response. And in that quiet refusal, the room felt something it did not like. Uncertainty. The music had not resumed. The laughter had stopped. The pause had gone too far to be ignored. For the first time that night, the system did not know how to correct him. Dean had not challenged it openly. He had not obeyed it either. The night hung there, suspended, carrying a weight it was never meant to hold. And whatever choice came next would not belong to the room anymore. Vegas did not pretend to be fair. It pretended to be glamorous. That was the trade. Bright lights, clean suits, and laughter loud enough to hide the machinery underneath. People came for the show, but the show was never the point. Control was. Every casino floor operated on understanding, not contracts. Everyone knew who mattered, who listened, and who stayed quiet. Power did not need to announce itself. It showed up early, sat where it wanted, and let the room adjust around it. Most people learned to feel that presence the way sailors feel a shift in wind. Performers were part of the system, but they were never the system itself. Even the biggest names worked inside boundaries they did not draw. The stage gave them visibility, not authority. It was a borrowed platform, one that could be taken back without warning. Dean Martin knew this world well. He had thrived in it, but he never confused success with safety. Fame made you useful. It did not make you untouchable. In Vegas, usefulness expired quickly if it became inconvenient. Public moments mattered more than private ones. A quiet disagreement backstage could be forgiven. A visible refusal could not. That was why humiliation, when it happened, was done in front of people. It served as instruction, not just for the target but for everyone watching. Laughter was often part of it, not because something was funny but because laughter signaled agreement. It showed the system was intact. If the crowd laughed, the message had landed. If the performer laughed too, the correction was complete. Most did. They learned when to smile, when to nod, when to step aside. Careers were built on reading those cues early and responding correctly. Those who failed to learn rarely stayed long enough to be remembered. Dean had learned. He had adjusted more times than anyone knew. His ease on stage came from understanding exactly how much of himself he was allowed to show. He played the relaxed man because it kept things smooth. It kept rooms calm. But smoothness came with a cost. It required swallowing moments that stayed with you later, small humiliations, quiet reminders, things you never talked about, even with people close to you. Vegas relied on that silence. The men who held real authority rarely interfered directly. They let others do it for them. A comment here, a look there, a suggestion dressed up as humor. It was cleaner that way. No scenes, no witnesses who could point to a single act and say, "This is where it happened." By the time someone realized they were being reduced, it was already done. That night followed the same pattern. Nothing overt, nothing dramatic, just enough pressure to remind everyone who the night belonged to. The rules were being enforced in plain sight. Dean recognized the pattern immediately. He had seen it used on younger performers, on staff, on people with no cushion to fall back on. It was efficient. It worked because most people wanted the discomfort to end more than they wanted dignity. The room expected him to understand that too. Vegas was built on repetition. Same rooms, same faces, same routines. People who caused trouble did not need to be banned. They simply stopped being invited. The silence that followed was louder than any confrontation. Dean had watched that happen to others. He had never mistaken charm for protection. What made this moment different was not the insult itself. It was how deliberately it was placed. It was not meant to provoke anger. It was meant to provoke compliance, to test whether the man on stage still understood his role. And beneath that, there was something colder, a reminder that the system could still reach him, that no amount of applause changed where authority lived. Those who later spoke about the night said they felt it, even if they could not name it. A tightening, a sense that the air had shifted, that the rules were being demonstrated, not discussed. Dean stood inside that demonstration. He knew exactly what response would satisfy the room. A line, a shrug, a smile that told everyone he was in on it, that he accepted the terms. That response would have ended the moment cleanly. But it would also confirm something else, that the system could still take from him publicly, and he would absorb it quietly. Vegas depended on that confirmation. What it did not depend on was resistance. The rules allowed for ego. They did not allow for refusal. And as the pause stretched, the room began to sense that Dean Martin was no longer playing the expected part. At first, most people thought the moment was only about Dean. That was the easy reading. A famous man tested in public, a reminder of who owned the room. That story fit what Vegas liked to believe about itself. But the real risk that night did not sit at the center of the stage. It stood slightly to the side, close enough to be seen, too close to be protected. Those who were there later said the person looked unsure even before the moment landed. Not nervous in a dramatic way, just careful. The kind of careful that comes from knowing you do not belong to the powerful group in the room. They had a role that depended on goodwill, on being tolerated, on not drawing the wrong kind of attention. Vegas was full of people like that. They lived between glamour and anonymity, useful when needed, invisible when not. Their mistakes were not corrected privately. They were corrected publicly so others would learn faster. When the comment came, it brushed past Dean and landed on this person as well. Not directly, not cruelly enough to stop the show, but enough to mark them. A laugh followed, then another. It was not laughter aimed at Dean's talent or his image. It was laughter that used him as cover, allowing something smaller to be diminished without protest. Dean noticed. People who worked with him later said he had a habit of watching rooms instead of crowds. He paid attention to who shifted, who stiffened, who suddenly became very still. This person became very still. Their hands did not move. Their face tightened slightly, not with anger but with awareness, the kind that comes when you realize there is nowhere to step back to. They could not respond. They could not laugh it off. They could not leave. If Dean chose to smooth the moment over, the room would move on, but the mark would stay, quietly, the way these things always did. That was the risk. Not humiliation as spectacle, but humiliation as instruction. Dean had seen what followed moments like that. A person stopped getting work, or started getting worse hours, or became known as difficult without ever doing anything wrong. It never happened loudly. That was the point. Standing there, Dean understood that his response would decide more than his own comfort. It would decide whether this person was left alone or left exposed. The system relied on people like them not being noticed when pressure was applied. It relied on the star absorbing the moment and allowing everything else to reset. Dean felt the weight of that expectation. He had once been on the other side of rooms like this, not powerless but unsure, dependent on approval he did not control. He had learned how quickly a night could turn. That memory did not arrive emotionally. It arrived practically, as a calculation. If he played along, the night would end cleanly. He would keep his position. The room would stay friendly. The person beside him would carry the moment alone. If he did not, the system would notice. The audience sensed none of this fully. They only felt the pause, the quiet, the stretch of time where nothing happened when something should have. But the people who mattered felt it sharply. They watched Dean's eyes, his posture, the way he did not rush to rescue the mood. This was not defiance, it was assessment. The person at risk waited, not looking at Dean, not looking at the crowd, just holding still, hoping the moment would pass. Dean could have made it pass. Instead, he allowed the discomfort to remain visible. That choice changed the shape of the room. Silence began to feel heavier than the laughter before it. People shifted in their seats. A few stopped smiling entirely. The pressure that had been aimed quietly outward began to turn inward. Dean was not angry. He was not dramatic. He was present. Those who later tried to describe it struggled to find the right word. It was not protection in a heroic sense. It was acknowledgement, the refusal to let the moment be reduced to nothing. By not moving past it, Dean made it real. The system did not like that. Moments like this were supposed to dissolve quickly, to leave no residue. Dean's stillness gave it shape. gave it memory. The person beside him was no longer invisible. That was the risk the room had not calculated. Dean understood that whatever came next would follow him, not them, that the cost would land on his side of the ledger. But standing there, he also understood something else. Some moments once seen clearly could not be unseen. And the night had already crossed that line. The room does not release the moment, it leans into it. What began as a test now becomes something heavier. The silence Dean allows does not correct the imbalance, it exposes it, and exposure makes people uneasy. Someone shifts in their seat, a voice clears its throat, a laugh tries to restart the rhythm and fails. The system senses resistance, not loud enough to confront, but present enough to disrupt control. Pressure responds the only way it knows how. The attention tightens, not on Dean's words because there are none, but on his refusal to move things along. The pause is no longer neutral. It has become an inconvenience. That is when the tone of the room hardens. Those who later recalled the night said the energy changed in small ways. Faces that had been relaxed became watchful. The warmth that usually protected performers cooled. This was no longer entertainment. It was correction in progress. The vulnerable person beside Dean feels it too. The longer the moment lasts, the more exposed they become. What had been a brief sting now threatens to settle into something permanent. Dean is aware of that risk. He also knows something else. Once the room begins to apply pressure, it does not stop on its own. It escalates until submission restores order. He has seen it happen. A performer cracks a joke too late. A staff member hesitates too long. The system pushes just enough to reassert itself, never enough to draw sympathy, just enough to be effective. This time, the escalation comes quietly. No raised voices, no overt threat, just the expectation that Dean will do what is required of him, that he will rescue the night, that he will signal agreement and allow the room to relax. The cost of refusing becomes clearer by the second. Dean understands that the longer he waits, the more this will be remembered, not as a misunderstanding but as a choice, and choices in Vegas were never ignored. The people with real authority are watching closely now, not reacting, measuring. They are not angry yet. Anger would mean losing control. What they feel instead is calculation. Dean stands inside that calculation. The pressure is no longer symbolic, it is personal. He feels the weight of every compromise he has made before, every moment he chose ease over friction. Those moments had kept his path clear. They had also trained rooms like this to expect compliance. Breaking that pattern, even quietly, carried consequences. Dean knows he could still end it. A smile would do it, a line delivered in the right tone. The crowd would respond instantly. Laughter would return, drinks would lift, the system would feel intact again. The vulnerable person would fade back into the background. The mark would remain, but it would no longer be visible. That is how these things usually ended. Dean does not do that. Instead, he allows the discomfort to deepen. He lets the stillness stretch beyond what feels polite, beyond what feels safe. It is not defiance, it is resolve. Those who were there later said that was the moment the room truly froze. Not because Dean had done something dramatic, but because he had not. The pressure increases in subtler ways now. A look exchanged between powerful men, a shift in posture, signals meant for each other, not for the audience. The message is clear. This has gone far enough. Dean understands that he is approaching a line. Once crossed, There is no way back to the earlier version of the night. The system will remember the refusal even if it pretends not to. He also understands that retreat now would not erase what has already happened. The pause has already been seen. The silence has already been felt. The room is waiting for an answer. Not a speech, not an explanation. A direction. Dean's calm becomes the most unsettling thing in the room. It denies the system the reaction it relies on. There is nothing to push against, nothing to punish openly. That is when the escalation reaches its peak. The night can no longer hold both the humiliation and the silence. One of them has to give. Dean makes his decision without signaling it. He does not look around for approval. He does not check the room's temperature again. He already knows it. What comes next will change how this night is remembered, not loudly, not publicly, but permanently. The system has pushed as far as it can without forcing a scene. Dean steps past the point where compliance is still possible. And in doing so, he accepts whatever follows. For a long moment, nothing moves. The room is waiting for the usual solution. A joke, a smile, a quick turn back into music, something that tells everyone this was only a moment and not a meaning. Dean does not give them that. His face stays calm, but it is no longer performing. The ease that normally floats around him is gone. What remains is a kind of quiet focus, the kind that does not ask permission. Those who were there later said they could feel the change before they understood it. The air became thinner. People stopped shifting in their seats. Even the people who liked power began to sit a little straighter. Because this was no longer a man saving the night. This was a man deciding what he would not accept. Dean does not raise his voice. He does not point. He does not attack anyone. That is what makes it worse for the people who want control. They know how to handle anger. They know how to handle drama. They can punish it publicly. They do not know what to do with composure. According to accounts, Dean's next move was so small that many in the back of the room did not see it right away. He simply stopped cooperating with the flow that had been built around him. He does not fill the silence. He lets it sit long enough for the entire room to realize that the show cannot continue without his agreement. That is the line being crossed. The system had tried to humiliate him in public. He answers by quietly removing the one thing they cannot manufacture in the moment. His participation. The band is waiting. The crowd is waiting. Even the people who set the trap are waiting. Dean stands in that stillness and makes them all wait with him. The vulnerable person beside him remains frozen, unsure whether this is help or danger. In Vegas, help could turn into danger quickly if the wrong people felt challenged. But Dean does not look at them for reassurance. He does not make it a performance of kindness. He simply positions himself so they are no longer alone in the pressure. That shift is subtle. It is also unmistakable. Those who understand these rooms see it immediately. The humiliation is no longer landing where it was meant to land. It is being held in place, examined, and reflected back without a word. The crowd begins to sense it too. Laughter dies out completely now, not because the crowd suddenly becomes noble, but because the moment no longer allows them to hide. If they laugh, it means something. If they clap, it means something. Silence becomes the only safe response. Dean lets them have that silence. He does not rescue anyone from it. A few people glance toward the tables where the powerful men sit. That is where answers usually come from. That is where correction usually begins. But the powerful men do not move. They are careful now. They do not want to show that they are being challenged. They want the night to reset without anyone noticing. Dean does not allow the reset. He does not make a speech. He does not explain what the room already understands. He simply stands there long enough that everyone knows what is happening, even if they cannot say it out loud. This is not a joke anymore. It is a refusal. And refusal in that world was never tolerated for long. The tension tightens in a different way now, no longer playful, no longer disguised. It becomes a question hanging over the room. How far will he take it? Dean's stillness becomes a mirror. It forces everyone to see what the system tried to do in plain sight. It forces them to see the smaller person caught in it. It forces them to notice the cruelty that was supposed to slide by unnoticed. For a moment, it looks like the room might break into argument. A man shifts as if to stand. Another leans in and whispers. A waiter pauses mid-step, sensing that the wrong movement could pull them into it. But Dean does not give anyone a target. He does not accuse. He does not plead. He simply refuses to move forward as if nothing happened. That calmness is the most dangerous thing on that stage, because it says he is not afraid of the room's disapproval. It says he is willing to let the night fall apart, if that is the cost of not being used. Those who later talked about it said they remembered Dean's eyes in that moment, not hard, not cold, just clear, as if he had finally decided that some parts of himself were no longer for sale. That is when the power in the room shifts, just slightly. Not because Dean wins, not because the system backs down. It shifts because, for the first time that night, the people who thought they controlled the moment realize they cannot force him to fix it. They can only punish him later. Dean knows that too. And still he holds the line. He stands there long enough to make the message permanent. Then he makes the next move. Not loudly, not heroically, just in a way that tells everyone in the room that the night will never return to what it was 5 minutes ago. The night does not end with applause. It ends the way these nights always end when something has gone wrong, quietly, without ceremony. People finish their drinks. Conversations restart in lower tones. The room pretends it knows how to move on. Dean leaves the stage without drawing attention to himself. There is no confrontation, no last look back, just the sense that something unresolved has been carried out of the room with him. According to those close to him, the first cost does not arrive immediately. It never does. Vegas rarely punishes in public. That would draw sympathy. Sympathy weakens control. Instead, the cost comes later, in ways that are harder to point to. Calls take longer to return. Invitations feel less certain. Conversations that once flowed easily now carry pauses. Nothing dramatic enough to complain about, just enough to be noticed. Dean feels it. He has been in this world long enough to recognize the shift. He knows when a room has cooled, even when it smiles. He understands when approval has become conditional again. Privately, the moment replays. Not as regret, as assessment. He does not ask himself whether he was right. He asks himself whether he is ready to live with what comes next. That is a different question. People later said he became quieter for a time. Not withdrawn, but more measured. Less willing to smooth over discomfort for the sake of ease. The charm remained, but it no longer worked automatically. There is a cost to that. Dean understands that the system he pushed against does not forget. It does not rush. It waits. It lets time do the work. Opportunities do not disappear overnight. They thin, slowly. The margin for error narrows, the tolerance for friction drops. He is still Dean Martin. The name still opens doors, but some doors open halfway now. Some stay closed without explanation. This is the price of being noticed in the wrong way. In private moments, Dean feels the weight of it more clearly. Not anger, not fear, something closer to fatigue, the tiredness that comes from knowing you have crossed a line you cannot uncross. The vulnerable person from that night is not mentioned publicly. No announcement is made. No statement is issued. That, too, is how the system works. But according to accounts, their path does not collapse. They are not erased. Whatever was meant to follow them quietly does not arrive in the same way. Dean never claims credit for that. He never speaks about the moment at all. Those who expect him to frame it as a stand are disappointed. He does not. Because it did not feel like a stand. It felt like an ending. The end of a certain kind of agreement he had lived with for years. The agreement that said he would absorb whatever was necessary to keep things smooth. Breaking that agreement does not make life cleaner. It makes it heavier. Dean carries that weight alone. Friends notice changes they cannot quite explain. He listens more. He pauses longer before responding. He seems less amused by the machinery of the rooms he once navigated effortlessly. When asked later about Vegas, he speaks kindly. He does not criticize it. He does not mythologize himself within it. That restraint is not generosity. It is understanding. He knows how easily stories can be used. The system continues. It always does. One night does not undo it. One refusal does not dismantle it. Dean does not pretend otherwise. What changes is internal. The ease he once carried is replaced by something firmer, less flexible, more costly, but also more honest. Those who were there that night say the moment stayed with them longer than they expected. Not because of drama, but because of what did not happen. No shouting, no triumph, just a quiet refusal and the consequences that followed it. That is what made it real. Dean pays for it in small ways, in spaces where he is tolerated rather than welcomed, in moments where the warmth does not fully return. He does not complain. He accepts it as the price of choosing not to disappear when the room asked him to. And while the system never acknowledges the moment, it adjusts around it. So does Dean. He moves forward changed, not hardened, not proud. Just more aware of what silence can cost and what it can protect. The night in Vegas becomes one of those moments that never turns into a story he tells, but quietly shapes the man who lived through it. And that, for him, is consequence enough. The story does not spread quickly. There is no headline for it, no public memory that fixes the night in place. It lives instead in fragments, carried by the people who felt it and never quite forgot it. Years later, some would mention it quietly, not as a legend, not as a triumph, just as a moment when the room did not get what it wanted. They remembered how ordinary it looked on the surface. A pause, a silence, a show that did not quite restart the way it was supposed to. That was part of why it stayed with them. There was nothing to point to and say, this is where history turned. And yet something did. Dean Martin never claimed the moment. He did not shape it into a story about courage or principle. He did not allow it to become part of his public image. That, too, mattered. In old Hollywood, men were often remembered for the roles they played when everyone was watching. Dean was remembered by some for the roles he refused to play when no one was meant to notice. The night in Vegas became one of those quiet reference points. When people spoke about him privately, they sometimes circled back to it, not because it made him larger than life, but because it made him smaller in a way that felt honest. He was not untouched by power. He was not above compromise. He was a man who had lived comfortably inside the system for a long time, which is why that refusal carried weight. It suggested that even someone who understood the rules completely could reach a moment where understanding was no longer enough. The vulnerable person from that night rarely appears in these recollections, not because they were unimportant, but because the system prefers to erase people without names. But among those who knew, there was an understanding that their life did not narrow the way it might have. That absence of damage was the quiet proof. Dean never spoke about it publicly. He did not correct anyone who misunderstood him. He let the story remain incomplete, unresolved, slightly uncomfortable. That restraint protected its meaning. Over time, the industry moved on as it always does. New rooms, new faces, new systems that looked different but worked the same way. The old rules were never discarded. They were just updated. Dean aged inside that reality. People noticed that his charm, while still present, had a different weight to it, less eager to please, less invested in smoothing every edge. He remained professional. He remained generous. But there was a boundary that had not always been there before. Those close to him sensed it. He did not explain it. He did not need to. Some nights change a man without changing his reputation. This was one of them. The legacy of that moment is not found in recordings or interviews. It is found in the way people describe Dean Martin when they are not trying to sell a story. They speak of calm, of steadiness, of a man who understood power well enough to know when not to negotiate with it. Not because he believed he could win, because he understood what it would cost him to pretend. The night in Vegas did not make him a hero. It did not dismantle a system. It did not protect everyone who needed protecting. What it did was smaller and in some ways harder. It marked the moment when Dean Martin chose not to disappear into the machinery that had carried him for so long. That choice did not reward him. It did not free him. It simply left him more himself than he had been the night before. And perhaps that is why the story lasts the way it does, quietly, without resolution, without applause. It ends the way many real moments end, with a man walking forward, carrying something no one else can see, and living the rest of his life slightly altered by a decision that never made the papers. In a world built on noise, that kind of legacy is easy to miss. But it is also the kind that stays.